Hello, my name is Minoni and I'm here to make a video about how to set up the Moza Aircross gimbal. I do this video because it was a bit of a headache for me to do it right when I did it the first time. And I had to figure out some things myself because the user manual is not really clear. There are videos on YouTube about how to calibrate this gimbal, but they are usually made very quickly because they want to show how fast it is to balance the camera on these gimbals, and in order to do this they do things very quickly and don't explain really accurately what is going on. I am a beginner. I bought this gimbal, it's my first gimbal. I am a photographer and I'm not a video maker. I do, of course, hybrid shooting because when I shoot weddings, I do mostly photographs, but I also take some videos because my clients ask me for videos. And so I figured it was a good idea to make this video to let people like me have an easier start on this gimbal, since I had to go through the hard part myself. And so maybe this will make life easier for other people like me. Okay, first thing, we want to prepare the gimbal and the camera for the use. You have these 3 batteries. Make sure that the positive polarity is upwards. The gimbal comes in this case, and it comes in pieces. You have to assemble it. This is the handle, and the batteries go inside the handle with the polarity, positive polarity upwards, this way. And then you have to screw this handle into the gimbal itself, the part with the motors. And this is the first weak point of this gimbal. The thread is made with poor quality aluminum. You can feel it even at the touch that the aluminum is not good quality. And screwing this part into the gimbal itself is a bit difficult because the thread don't match very well. It's not easy. Very rarely I have been able to do it first time. You need to rotate a bit until you can find the point where the actual the actual threads align. The problem is that since this is poor quality aluminum, it is easy to damage it. I am sure that if you put too much pressure, or if you force this handle inside the gimbal in a not proper way, in a not correct way, this will damage the thread and make the whole thing useless. So you have to place special care in screwing this part. What I do usually is to use my right hand, my best hand, this way, and thanks to the gravity, I do not have to place much pressure on the gimbal, and then I try to find with small movements the correct alignment of the threads. And so this is done, but as you can see, it's you have to be careful when doing this, not to put too much pressure, otherwise you risk to, to ruin the threads and make the thing useless. After this, you have to screw in the tripod into the handle of the gimbal, and there's a second caveat. The handle of the gimbal has this part which hosts the screw, and the problem is that this part comes off very easily, and you may not be aware of this, and you may lose it if you do it, especially in a hurry or in a place where not in your home but outdoors maybe. You run the risk of losing this, and if you lose this, you cannot use the tripod, which is important because the tripod helps for the balancing of the camera. And so you have to use a coin, and luckily Moza has been wise enough to make these parts screwable with a coin instead of a screwdriver, because not everyone maybe has a screwdriver. Maybe you go filming outdoors somewhere, you don't have a screwdriver, but usually you always have a coin in your pocket, so you can screw this. Make sure that you screw it tight. Okay, and now you can screw the tripod inside the handle. Okay, and this completes the first part, which is the preparation of the gimbal. Now let's move on to the preparation of the camera. You have to prepare the camera. The first thing you have to do is to mount the lens with everything that you use with the camera. If you mount a microphone on it, place it on the camera. Anything that you use with the camera must be in the final final configuration, because if you add these accessories afterwards, after balancing, you may unbalance the camera, which is not a good idea. If you want to use, for instance, the cable, the USB cable that lets you control some camera commands from the joystick of the gimbal, you need to do this before the balancing. Okay. Now the Moza Aircross uses this mounting plate, which is very handy, and you can screw it inside the camera hole for the tripod. There are, as you can see, there is a meter scale in centimeters here that lets you see the point where you screw this plate. You have to be careful that you can see, I hope, there is a lens indication here with an arrow. You have to make sure that you mount this plate with the arrow pointing towards the lens this way and not the other way around. Then I will explain you the reason for this in a minute. So now you have to screw this plate inside. Where to screw it, you may ask. I actually have not really understood the reason. I mean, when you have so much play of space. However, I follow the instructions that are given in the manual, and they show the the camera being mounted with the screw between 1 and 2, and so I did this myself. I think it's not very important, but maybe if you change lenses, I don't know, if you use more heavy lenses, maybe this is important. I have no idea actually. I use always lightweight lenses because otherwise, using the gimbal can be tiring, especially if you do it all day long, like in a wedding. You don't want, to have a heavy lens. So, okay, now it is important that you screw this tightly. Usually, every manual, when they teach you about how to screw things inside of the things, they say do not, screw too tight because you may damage, and that's a good advice. But in this case, it's a bad advice, because if you don't screw this very tight, it may happen that when you balance the camera onwards and backwards, if you do not screw this tight, then this may unscrew before the actual plate is unscrewed from the gimbal, and this may cause you even to have your camera fall, and you don't want that, of course. So screw this tightly, and so you are sure that nothing will happen to your camera. Okay. Another thing, if you use one of the latest Sony cameras that have a special detection that lets this detection let you let you disable the viewfinder if the rear LCD is not in a complete flat position. So usually what I do when I shoot videos is to slightly move the LCD away from the flat position, so this will disable the viewfinder without having me to do this by software. Why I do this? Because if I need to use the camera to take photographs, I can quickly pull this back, and then I can use the viewfinder immediately, or for whatever reason, if I want to look into the viewfinder instead of the LCD, it's enough that I do this, and I can enable the viewfinder again. Okay, so if you do this is an Alpha 7 III, and it has this feature. So I move this in this position in order to disable the viewfinder. So you want to do this also before balancing the camera, because it's a very little movement of weights, but every bit counts. So ultimately, you prefer to do this. And then, of course, if you want to use this cable that Moza provides with the gimbal, that lets you control some of the camera functions from the joystick of the gimbal, you need to plug this into the camera before balancing, but we will do this after we mount the camera onto the gimbal itself. So now we will see the other part of this operation, how to mount the camera on the gimbal and to balance the camera on the gimbal. But before, we will see how to calibrate the gimbal, because this can be necessary, and I will tell you why in a moment. Okay, so now we talk about calibration of the gimbal. Why is that important? Well, if you're lucky, you may not have to do this, because your gimbal will come to you already calibrated properly from the factory. However, it can happen that the factory does not calibrate the gimbal well, or maybe during the transportation, for some reason, the gimbal got unbalanced. That is what happened to me. When I first installed the gimbal, I balanced the camera and so on. My gimbal had a problem that the camera was correctly balanced when I balanced it with the motor off, but when I turned the motors on, the camera rolled to the right, and I tried to adjust the balancing in any possible way, but did not succeed, until finally I realized that I had to recalibrate the gimbal. Gimbal has two calibration parameters. One is for the gyroscope and the other one is for the accelerator. And here comes the first mistake of the goods and manual, because from the instructions that are given, and also following the order, logical order from left to right of the icons in the Moza app, one is led into thinking that the gyroscope should be balanced first, while in fact it is the opposite. And in a later video that Moza released about 1 month ago, they actually explained the procedure properly, and they had the accelerometer calibrated first. So if you only use this manual, you may make this mistake, because this manual is very unclear about the procedure, and it only states about how to do this and how to do that, but don't explain the order. Okay. So first thing, we want to calibrate the accelerometer. And here's the second problem, because the manual shows the correct position to this with a drawing. So it's not a drawing, it's a photograph actually, on page 15. But they say that the camera holder, which is the plate here, and which is connected to this part, the camera holder is absolutely parallel to the surface. Okay, and this is the main problem, because they show in the drawings and in the photograph this part to be completely parallel, but can you see this screw here? This screw here is basically what lets you move, this plate from side to side in order to accommodate different sizes of cameras. This screw is not on the same level as this part. So the problem is that even when it's in position, I don't know if you can see from here, it is impossible to have this camera holder, as they call it, perfectly parallel to the table. It is impossible. It always happens that, of course, because of gravity, this plate falls on one side. And when I first calibrated the accelerometer, I followed the photograph. They didn't warn me about this screw, so I assumed it was okay. But in fact, it was not okay. It was not okay because after I calibrated the accelerometer that way, my camera, my gimbal started to make the camera point the nose downwards. Okay, it made the camera pitch downwards. And even in that occasion, I tried, to calibrate, to balance the camera in many different ways. I tried moving mounting this in different positions. I tried everything that was possible to try, to no avail. Until I realized it must have been this part wrong. So I recalibrated again with the gimmick, and I will show you now. Okay, first thing, in order to place correctly the gimbal for the calibration, you always have to make sure that this part indicated by the arrows here point upwards. This is crucial, okay? So the correct position in order to calibrate the accelerometer is this one. This is correct position, except of course for this part about the screw that I just told you about. Now, question that everybody probably will ask. I also asked this myself and could not find an answer for the user manual. And the question is, should I calibrate the gimbal with the camera on or with the camera off? I tried both ways, and in fact, as long as I did the gimmick that I am going to show you to keep this perfectly parallel, it absolutely made no difference to have the camera on or off. Now, of course, I am not a technician, so I cannot tell you this is correct or this is not correct. I can just tell you about my personal experience. In my personal experience, it made no difference if I had the camera on or off. The important part was to really keep this parallel to the table. And in order to do this, I had to insert, something here to balance, the height of the screw that makes it impossible to keep this holder parallel to the table. So I used some of these. These are composites that I made for a model, and I found for this a good use also in this case. So I put this, this composite here under this part until I find a good balance point. You have to, to make sure that these are okay. So it's not a good idea to put them on one side only, because this will unbalance us in the other direction. So better to make them like this, to place them like this, and you basically have to find the correct quantity of paper so that the plate is in perfect position. Now it seems okay, it cannot move. If I press this one side or the other, perhaps there's one too much. Okay, now it seems in perfect position. Now you can finally calibrate the accelerometer. So you have to take your phone or your iPad, in my case, activate the Moza Aircross. In order to do this, you first have to turn the gimbal on, and you have to do this holding the gimbal and not having it lay down on the table, because when you turn it on, the motor will shake, and you don't want it to shake when it's constrained by the table surface. Okay, so we turn this on. Okay. Now the gimbal is turned on, and the motor, the app notices me that the motor has been protected. So what I have to do now is to turn the motor off. You can see in this app, Moza app, there is this symbol of, power on off. It's green now. If you press it, it turns gray. Now the motor is off, but the gimbal is turned on. This is the configuration that you want to use to calibrate. The gimbal must be on, but the power must be off. The motor, must be off. So to make it clear, you have to first turn on the gimbal. When you turn it on, also the motor will turn on. So you want to do this not when it's lying on the table, but when you have it in your hands. After having turned it on, you have to, first you have to connect the app, which will do it automatically. And when it's connected, also the app will disable the motor. After, not disable, but will protect the motor. This is their terminology. After the motor has been protected, like I show you, you have to turn the motor off. And this will turn it off, but leaving the connection of the gimbal on. And this is the correct setting for the calibration. Now we place the gimbal again where it's supposed to go. Remember, you have to always look for the arrows here facing upwards, so this way, arrows facing upwards, and you have to place, like we did before, in a position where this plate is perfectly parallel to the table surface. Now it's ready for calibration, and what you have to do is to go to the calibration here, calibration page, select accelerometer, and then calibrate. Okay, it will take only a few seconds. I don't calibrate now because I already calibrated and it was perfect, so I won't do it again. After you have calibrated the accelerometer, after this, what you have to do is to take the gimbal, open the tripod, put it this way, and while leave it perfectly still, no movement on the table, you select gyroscope here and calibrate also the gyroscope. The standing still is very important also in the accelerometer calibration. It is always important that your surface is perfectly still, so don't hang on the table or don't move the table. Make sure that the table is perfectly still before completing any calibration procedure. Okay, so now we have calibrated the accelerometer, we have calibrated the gyroscope, and we are ready to go on with the balancing of the camera on the gimbal. So what you have to do is to turn the gimbal off. Okay, now the gimbal is ready for receiving the camera and for the balancing of the camera, which we'll see in a minute. Okay, now we are going to balance the camera on the gimbal. And the first thing that we have to do, of course, is to mount the camera on the gimbal. So this is the correct position. The arrows are pointing upwards, and the gimbal is ready to receive the camera on the blade. What you have to do now is to loosen this screw, because as you can see, the camera cannot enter the gimbal if this is positioned closest to the gimbal, because there is not enough room. So you have to move this way, okay? What we have to do first, always make sure that the arrows are pointing upwards. This is the position where you mount the camera. Note that on the plate here there is an arrow with the indication insert. This means that the camera must be inserted this way and not this way. So I mean, this is how you hold the gimbal. Here are the joystick commands. This means that the camera must be mounted this way, from the side camera towards you, this way, not this way. And the reason you have to do this is because of this pin. This pin is very useful because it prevents the camera from falling down when you mount it on the gimbal. Say you mount the camera, but you don't mount it very tight. You don't screw this very tightly. It's a bit loose. And what happens then it's that the camera may slide because of course the gravity, since the lens is heavier, of course, than the camera body. It may happen that if this is not screwed very tightly, the camera may slide this way and fall on the ground. But thanks to this pin here and this plastic stop here, the camera will not fall because the pin will block the camera against this stop. So this is very useful, but the reason it requires you to mount the camera in this direction and not the other way around, otherwise you will not be able to do this. The moment you mount it and make it slide here on the rails, you hear a click at a certain point. This means that the plastic stop has passed beyond the pin, and this means that now your camera is ready to be screwed tightly in position. Okay. Now you will have to change this again, because obviously the camera will not be balanced this way. But first you need to move the camera the closest possible to the body, and in order to do this, you first, like I said, screw this tightly, then you unscrew this bottom screw and make sure that your camera is as near as possible to the motor. This is one of the motors. The camera should be close as possible to the motor. It's not clear if it can touch it or not. I personally like to leave it a little space, just very little space between the camera and the motor. You may never know. Okay, so I leave a little space, just as little as possible, then I screw it tightly. Okay, now this is in final position. Of course, this will have to be balanced. And now we start with the balancing. There are different, how can I say, methods or philosophy. Some say that it's best to first balance this, and it is actually also what the manual says. Other people say that it's best to first balance this. It really depends. In my personal experience, you never reach a perfect balance at the first try. I mean, you basically what you have to do is to get close. Get close in each of the three axes, then do a second round after you got close of adjustment. Okay. So basically, it's quite irrelevant where you start. I think that one can visually evaluate which is the most unbalanced axis, and I would say it's the yaw axis actually the most unbalanced. So I will start from here, and you unscrew this part, and then you have to move this arm to the opposite direction of where it is unbalanced. So the camera here is unbalanced to the right, so you have to move this towards the left. And this is probably the most difficult of the three axes to balance, because there is a lot of friction between the arm and the motor, even if the motor is turned off, but there's still a lot of friction, so it requires some force in order to move this. And of course, the more force it's required, the more difficult it is to make fine adjustments. So we'll be fine with just a broad adjustment. Can be okay like this for the moment. We screw this back. Now we can balance this. As you can see, the camera is slightly pointing the pitch towards the lens. This means that we have to unscrew this and move this slightly to this direction to balance it. Now I have moved it too much. This can be maybe okay for now. So I unscrew it tightly, and about now this part, as you can see, it's very back heavy. So I unscrew this screw, which is the one that holds the plate into place. So be careful here, because it will also move your camera, and it may have you let camera fall. So be very careful here. Don't unscrew it too much, just unscrew it a little so that it can move, because you want to make very small movements like this. It can be okay. Then we screw it on place. Now we get back to the beginning, because after these adjustments we see that now we have probably to make some fine adjustments here. Perhaps I need to move this very little to the right. These are the most difficult adjustments to make, because fine adjustments are difficult, especially on this motor, because like I said, there is a lot of friction. Now we assess the balance in the other axis, and also, as you can see, there is a lot of friction here, because even if you apply some force, the camera tends not to go back to the balancing state, so it's difficult to see if you reach the perfect balance or not. Now I can see that I probably moved this too much. As you can see, it's not easy. I mean, it's a matter of small adjustments small steps. Now I think we are more or less okay. Perhaps we need to, I don't know if this can be okay. Possibly it's okay. We can try now to turn on the motor. Now maybe it's pointing a bit again towards the back of the camera, so maybe we can make still a little adjustment. Very, very fine adjustment here. Like I said, it's not easy. I mean, in the YouTube videos they make it very fast. The point is, the motor, if the accelerometer and the gyroscope are calibrated correctly, the motor will compensate. The motors will compensate for a little imprecision in the balancing, but you want to be as accurate as possible when balancing, because the more accurate you are, the less work the motors have to do, and the smoother will be the final result of your movies. So I think this can be okay. Now we can turn the motor on. And as you can see, now the motor is on. The camera, since I have calibrated both the accelerometer and the gyroscope, okay, the camera is working correctly, and now it is in yaw follow mode. So if I turn, you can see to the left, the motor follows my movement as it's supposed to do. Then I can switch to mode number 2, which is yaw and pitch, and now also the motor will also follow my pitch movement towards the top and bottom, as well as to the left and the right. And then of course I also have the joystick that I can use. As you can see, I can use the joystick to move in any direction that I want. Okay. Now we can try to go to the third mode, which is the lock mode. With the lock mode, every movement that you make, you can see up or down, the camera is always locked to the position, and it will stay that way. And then we have the fourth mode, which is raw follow, and this will make a sort of a special effect when you go straight and towards you and make maybe a curve. The camera will roll following your movement, and will make a very cinematic effect. It will be something that, like if I turn this way, the camera will follow the moment on the roll axis. And this is it. I can turn the motor off. And this is all for now. I hope that this video has been helpful to you. And let me know in the comments if I have been clear in my explanation. And let me know if you have some questions. I will try to answer them. like I said, I'm not a technician, and neither I am an expert of these things. I'm learning myself. But since I had a lot of headache, like I said, making this thing work the way it's supposed to do, I thought that I could save some of that headache for other beginners like me. Okay, that's all for now.